This is a segment from NBC Nightly News, I think July 8th, 2020. There's surprising, they don't know if kids can transmit COVID-19 or not. But what I find interesting is I had a video studio, I had a lot of clients in my room, and I had a couple clients tell me, you know, my daughter lives with me and she has a child, and the child comes home sick, and then I get sick. And he would complain about it. And I heard this from more than one client. And so it kind of made me wonder what's been done research-wise in the last 20, 30 years about transmission and about, you know, knowing what stage somebody's in. And the answer is I don't think really much has been done, because it's always been about a drug or a vaccine. We don't know the long-term effects of vaccines. In a way, our body is a vaccine. Something enters it and it fights it, and then it builds up an immunity, and I think it even builds up a memory of some kind to it. We don't even know if viruses hang out in our body, or they may actually hang out in parts of our body for years and just come out for some reason, stress, or maybe, who knows why. Maybe another virus wants to come in and the other virus comes out to fight the other virus. There's so much about viruses that's not being reported. I'm just going to unpause for a second.
Now is our medical correspondent, Dr. John Torres. Dr. John, the big...
So basically in this segment, they talk about that they don't know a lot. And what needs to be admitted to, and I don't think it's ever going to be asked, it's never going to be admitted to, the last 30 years have been a joke, because the bottom line was mainly seniors die from flu and pneumonia, and that just was acceptable. It's just it's the way it's been. And so something comes along that's either slightly worse than what we had in 2018, because that was really bad and that was covered up, but this time around it's a little more contagious, or a lot more contagious, whatever, and everybody's getting sick, so you're going to get higher numbers. But we weren't prepared, because we let things be okay for the last 30 years as they were. So there was no curiosity. There was nothing about, can we make masks that maybe glow and if you're sick, maybe even have masks for different kind of sicknesses. You wear a mask, if it turns a color, you're sick. Maybe you have one for the flu, one for pneumonia, one for SARS, one for COVID. You know, more testing. They're talking about testing now. Oh, we're just not ready. Oh, this is something that's been going on for 30 years. So there's no point in making it political. Until the doctors admit all the stuff they were not curious about and went with the status quo, all this is kind of gobbledygook. It's just not getting to the underbelly. I'm going to play a little bit.
Concern for parents right now, as we said at the top of the broadcast, is it safe to send my kids back to school? So what do we know about how vulnerable they are to getting the virus?
Well, Lester, there's still a lot we don't know. There have been some small studies that have found children are less likely to get infected and less likely to get seriously ill. But in extremely rare cases, kids have had a serious inflammatory reaction to the virus weeks after being infected. And there have been a few hundred cases, but most have been treated successfully.
Now, is it possible that kids either get a more mild form of the virus, or their antibodies ramp up and they kill it, so that when they then transmit it to older people, they're transmitting a more mild form and the seniors can fight it off? I don't know. I'm just throwing that out as a theory. Aren't they curious? What have they been doing the last 30 years? When do we start asking, what kind of clinical trials have you been doing the last 30 years that were not about drugs and not about drugs or vaccines, but just about how transmission occurs, how we can test for these different sicknesses? I don't think we have a flu or pneumonia test. You're just, other than a blood test, why don't we have a mask test? Okay, you think you're sick, put this mask on, breathe into it for 5 minutes. If the mask turns a certain color, if the mask turns one of these colors, then you're sick. Maybe even have one mask that's like a rainbow mask. It'll cover like 5 different sicknesses. And if it turns a color after 5 minutes, you've got one of those sicknesses. This is 2020. We don't have this? Really? How is that possible? It's not, It's only possible if the medical community didn't want it to happen. If they wanted it to happen, it would have happened years ago. So all this stuff is bluster and worry about the moment. Don't let that manipulate you politically, because there is no short-term answer. This stuff should have been dealt with over the last 30 years, and it wasn't. And that's why we were unprepared.
And Dr. John, the CDC says children are not spreading the virus. What evidence do they have to that?
Well, the CDC doesn't have strong evidence that kids are spreading the virus, but we really don't.
See, they don't really have evidence. Now, we're supposed to trust WHO and the CDC. What have they done? Other than, I know they do certain things, but they don't seem to be very curious, do they, about getting to the bottom of problems. They just seem to be more about reporting the problems and then hoping somebody in the medical community comes up with a vaccine or a drug. It always comes back to a vaccine or a drug. That has to change.
No, because we haven't done enough studies. And since we're not really testing children, there's still a lot more to learn.
You see,
Yeah.
It's 2020. We haven't done enough studies. He's admitting it. But nobody's gonna call the medical community on the lack of testing over the last 30 years. Just that, oh, we just haven't done enough yet. It's been going on for 30 years.
It's frustrating how much we still don't know about this virus. Dr. John, thanks.
Is it frustrating?
As the school debate rages
Is it
on,
frustrating, really? Is that what it is? It's frustrating? Isn't it almost mysterious to wonder why? Why nobody cared about solving some of these sicknesses? Or monitor, or at least having better tests? You know, if they do 1 million tests a day, and there's 300 million people in the United States, that means you could get one test a year, basically. So, and as they say in this report at some point, you got to be able to do 3 or 4 million tests a day. He's right. That way you can at least do a test every 3 or 4 months. So the whole testing thing's a joke. We don't even have enough masks, let alone masks that would actually detect what sickness you may have. All this stuff going on this year, it's all bluster. It's all about trying to take a position where you blame somebody else. That's what this is all about. And they do it with their suits. Nobody's asking the question, why weren't you working on this for the last 30 years? Didn't you? To me, a mask that glows the color of what sickness you are, it's a no-brainer. I know it's not easy to do. I know it could have taken years, but we've had years. Now you've compromised so many people's lives in so many ways because nobody's now going to, and not only did that you compromise everybody, nobody's asking the question. Ask the question. Couldn't we have been doing research the last 30 years so that by now we'd have all kinds of masks that would tell you what kind of sickness you may have? Instead of taking blood tests, you put on a mask and you breathe into it for 5 minutes. See what happens. We really can't figure this stuff out.
This has officially soared past 3 million cases. It's pushing hospitals and places to the brink. And now with a massive demand for testing, some are waiting weeks for their results. Here's Joe Fryer.
In less than a month, the U.S. has seen more than 1 million confirmed cases of COVID-19, putting a strain on hospitals.
We're full. If you come through the ER right now, it's not like you get whisked up to one of several beds.
50-year-old Steve Skinner, who had no pre-existing conditions, nearly died in a Texas hospital.
At one point, they lost me.
Okay, he just said at one point they lost me and they resuscitated him. But what we don't know, did they put him in a medically induced coma? Because they lose patients that way. So that they do that so they can medically intubate them. And this again gets to this other issue I've been pushing. You understand if it gets really, really bad, their hands are tied on how they can help you. But before these conditions get really, really bad, we're not given any guidance regarding diet, exercise, what we can do, maybe to ward it off before the virus overtakes our body. Very little, if any, discussion on that. I don't recall any, do you? If you think you're getting sick, you might want to do this, this, and this. Nothing. So even now, he's talking about how he almost died, but we don't know, was it because he had a tube down his throat? Was it because when they put a tube down your throat, they have to medically put you into a coma first, which can stop your heart. So I'm glad he recovered. You just wonder if they gave this guy a chance to fight it off before it got really, really bad, and they just didn't tell him what to do. And we won't know because these stories are always so superficial. They don't get into it deeply enough.
And he was paddles on to get my heart started again.
Nationwide, the testing system is also overwhelmed.
I got told I would get my results back in 7 to 14 days.
Lines are long, patience is short. The site in New Orleans ran out of test kits in just minutes.
So think about it. All these tests. They're doing 1 million tests a day. Are they giving out any guidance with these tests? Whether, while you're waiting to find out if you're sick or not, you can do the following to maybe, and it may help you fight off the virus if you have it. Eat raw onions, raw garlic, jalapeno pepper, things that are known, naturally occurring things. Breathe deep with, and maybe you just ingest the fumes of certain kinds of foods. Is it better than nothing? We don't know. It may not be better than nothing, but isn't there any kind of guidance you can give people when you're testing them? Besides just testing them, you actually hand them something that says, this may actually help you fight the coronavirus if you have it. It's the least they could do since the test takes so long to come back.
At this time, we should have enough.
The coronavirus task force says the U.S. is now averaging up to 700,000 tests a day.
The states really crushed their goal in June.
But many experts say it's still not nearly enough.
We should be doing millions of tests a day, probably about 3 to 4 million tests a day, if we're going to get our hands around this disease.
The challenge is not just getting a test, but getting
tested is not enough if you're not going to also give people guidance early on as to what to do. And by the way, you're going to see the numbers of deaths percentage-wise drop dramatically. It's already starting to happen. Again, because early on they had medical trainees working on patients when they shouldn't have been, and that amped up the percentages. I'm assuming the doctors are communicating and coming up with drug-related ways to fight the disease off. But I think we were at 6%. We were at 15%. It dropped to 8% really quickly after a couple of weeks. Then I think it dropped to like 6%. Stayed around 6% of the people, of the cases, those who died. So if you were a COVID case, you had a 6% chance of dying for the first couple of months. I think up to the third month. But then it started dropping slowly, keeping in mind that it was amped up before, so it was actually dropping faster, but it's masked because of the early cases where the percentage is a lot higher. So it's probably, what is the actual death rate today compared to when we started? When we started, like I said, it might have been anywhere from 8% to 15%, stabilized around 6%, but it may be as low as 2% now, which obviously is still a lot, but it's a huge improvement. And I just don't know what you do with that. I mean, nobody knows what percent is acceptable of cases. But if it's dropping to 2 or 1 or less, at some point we're going to have to ask, is that low enough?
Results, with some saying it's taking a week or longer. One company, Quest Diagnostics, says the average turnaround time for results is now 4 to 6 days, double last month. Labs across the country are experiencing backlogs, something Robert Rosetko learned firsthand.
That's where I slept for 2 weeks in that fold-out couch.
He isolated from his family after falling ill last month, but says his test result, which was ultimately negative, took 27 days.
Mostly I was just angry, at the system, that it didn't work, that, I waited 27 days.
Asking people to wait for days or weeks, in my mind, is just unconscionable and incredibly harmful for both taking care of people and controlling the break.
And I think the last 30 years with no testing done, no progress in face masks that actually test and show you a color so that you know if you're sick or not, I think that's unconscionable too. We've made so much progress in so many ways. And nobody came up with the idea of just masks that turn colors so that you know you're sick. I just find that really suspicious and incredible.
At the outbreak.
Experts say for those who get tested, quick results are essential for contact tracing.
If you're going to do contact tracing and the test comes back in 5 to 7 days, you might as well not do contact tracing because it's already too late.
The government has invested billions in testing and contact tracing, a job that's hard even with quick results. In New York City last month, there were about 12,000 positive cases. Contact tracers were able to get in touch with more than 10,000 of them, but only 6,700 completed an interview with a tracer, and fewer than half provided information for people they could have infected, growing obstacles in a race to slow the spread. Joe Fryer, NBC News.
At the Supreme Court
Anyway, just remember as every day we get fed information about the now, ask yourself, well, what about the last 30 years? We really couldn't have made more progress. And again, I go back to the mask. You put a mask on, a medical mask that tells you within a few minutes if you're sick or not. We're not sophisticated enough as a world to come up with that kind of a product. Really? I don't believe it. I just think for some reason it just wasn't a priority. So remember that, and don't be manipulated politically. Oh, Trump didn't do this fast enough. Oh, he didn't do that fast. That's all bunk. This is a 30-year problem in the making, and that's really what you should remember.